So with that being said, Lynn is going to come and talk about how to repair your credit. Not only for you, I'm sure all your credit is perfect, but for your customers, because sometimes you get them to qualify and the credit is 500, but you can bring it up to 650 like within a month. But she'll tell you how to do that, and welcome, Lynn.
Hi, Lynn, how are you?
Good morning, everybody.
Morning.
Good morning. Thank you so much for having me. A couple of things I just want to talk about before we go into the credit presentation. So we have a company that we use, Credit Technologies, and they have a trainer that has been doing some training. The training is very long, so we shortened it, and I'm doing the training instead. But I wanted to touch on the most important points. So obviously, credit is very important, and it plays a big role in what we do and our ability to close transactions. Before we jump into that, I just want to touch base on a couple of things. I know you've heard a lot about rates changing and the Fed's changing the rate. So when the Fed's change the rate, just some of you may know this already, but just so you can know the difference. When the Fed changes the rate, they change the rate based upon what the bank borrows money at. It doesn't necessarily always hit the consumer point for point. So if the Fed says they're lowering the rate by a quarter, it doesn't mean the consumer's rate will be lowered by a quarter. Sometimes the Fed can lower the rate, but there can be activity in the market that could actually have the consumer rate go up. Consumer rates are determined by the 10-year Treasury, and the 10-year Treasury is based upon if people are buying into the bonds or selling out of bonds to purchase stocks. So there's a lot of volatility in the market right now because of different things that are going on. So uncertainty causes people to sell stocks and buy bonds, which keeps the rate lower. We're seeing right now rates in the threes again, which we haven't seen in a long time. We're locking 3.8s, 3.7s in some cases. 15-year fix is all the way down into the lower threes now. So there's a lot of activity that's causing the rates to be lower. And when the Feds come in and potentially lower the rate in July, it doesn't necessarily mean the rates will drop again even more. They could drop more, but a lot of people, if you hear people say now, I've heard it already so many times in the last week, I want to wait until I hear what happens in July when the Feds have their meeting again. It doesn't necessarily mean the consumer rate will go down. So it's not a reason for people to wait. It could actually go up. The Fed rate, again, is what the banks borrow money at. It's not what the consumer borrows money at. So if that conversation's coming up and stopping people, I'm more than happy to speak with them because the trends can show you, and there's charts, we have charts that show you, it's not a direct correlation. Yes, it affects it. Of course it affects it. If the banks are borrowing money at a lower percentage, then they have more room in their margin. But if the stock market's going crazy and everybody's selling out of bonds and buying stocks, that's going to cause the rates to go up, even if the Feds are lowering the rate. Okay? So that's something that's been coming up a lot. I just wanted to touch base on that. If you have any questions on that, you can always ask. I'm more than happy to answer questions. Supreme Lending just won again, which is such an honor, the best places to work. And being a mortgage company, being in that category is usually unheard of. To win is even more incredible. We have people all throughout the state, throughout Georgia. It's just an incredible company to work for. And they do things because to keep their people happy and content, and they provide value in their lives, not just in business but in personal. They do the most amazing things for people. But the company's just so good, and they're constantly adding value. One of the things that they do is they provide us tools like this company, Credit Technologies. Credit Technologies isn't inexpensive. It's expensive to run credit through a company like this, but because of it, we're able to really help consumers. For example, when I pull a credit report, it'll tell me right off the bat, it has a calculated potential improvement. So let's say we pull a score and it says 620. Well, a 620 may really impact the borrower's interest rate significantly, but it'll tell me right away I can get an immediate 30 points, which will bring the buyer into a different category. And it's just by a click of a button, I can send the buyer a full analysis on how to get their score up 30 points. And it could be done within 30 days. So I usually talk very quickly. I'm going to try to slow it down today and go over this presentation because there's a lot of value in here. Obviously, a credit score, it says it right here, can make a difference between renting or owning. If we have someone in a low credit score, which is going to cause their interest rate to be higher, it causes their affordability to be higher, and they may not be able to buy. Or if we teach them while they're preparing to rent or buy how to get their score up, and they go through this quick little analysis, it can help them really save money and turn them from a renter into a buyer pretty quickly. Okay, so just to start at the top, there's a lot of different information that's inaccurate when you hear people talk about credit scores. So we're going to go through slide by slide, and I'm going to touch on the most important pieces that are important for you to know about either your own credit or your consumer's credit, your client's credit. So this is just the agenda of what we're going to do. So we're going to just flip to the next page. Okay, so how many here have heard the term FICO? FICO, okay. FICO is a calculation of credit. It's an algorithm that is used to determine someone's credit score. Credit score is based upon a lot of different categories, and we're going to go into a pie chart in a second that shows you how your credit is calculated and what people can do to help their scores go up. I put this in a handout instead of PowerPoint because I wanted you to be able to take it with you and have something to refer back to. If you're with a client and they're talking about their credit, it's not coming from you, it's coming from Credit Technologies, so you can even show them this information. There's two different types of scores. There's the Vantage score and then there's the FICO score. The Vantage score is more of a consumer credit report, where the FICO score is more used by institutions. They're calculated a little differently, but pretty much the same. Their score ranges, Vantage score goes from 501 to 900. The FICO score starts at 300 and goes up to 850. The Vantage score is not used by lending, so we're not going to go too far into that, but there are different types of scores, and one of the reasons why, when you see Credit Karma, you'll hear a lot of people say, oh, I pulled Credit Karma, and then the lender pulled my score, and Credit Karma says, my score is a 700, but the bank said my score is a 760. They're two different scores. They're calculated on different algorithms. One is considered a consumer monitoring system, and one is considered a risk-based credit score. So as a lender, we want the risk-based credit score because it tells us more on the ability for someone to pay a bill, okay? Again, Vantage is more for personal monitoring. For FICO, there's 5 main categories that they calculate on, and we're going to jump into that in a second. Does count paid collections, considers all dates, all late dates, and requires one open active account reporting at least 6-month history. Most widely used score by creditors, lenders, and still used today, and inquiries that are considered rate shopping have little to no impact, and we're going to go into why that matters. So on the next page, you'll see there's various FICO scoring models. If you go to the middle where there's a highlighted section, that is what lenders use. When I say lender, it's Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. So if we have a loan being sold to Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, we have to use this scoring model. For FICO, it's for Experian, it's score 2. For Equifax, it's score 5, and for TransUnion, it's score 4. So when we pull credit, we're pulling based upon that scoring model, and that's how we determine our credit score. So it is only used. Now you'll notice that if you go to an auto loan, it has a different scoring model. If you go to get a credit card, it has a different scoring model. That's why everybody gets different scores. If someone, you'll hear very commonly, I went to get a car, they told me it was 800, I'm applying for a mortgage, you're telling me my score is 720. It's a completely different scoring model. It's scored separately based upon the inquiry. So as a mortgage company, I pull credit, it sends a message saying I'm a mortgage company, and it scores it according to what I need it to score so that I can sell the loan to Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, or to whoever the investor is. Okay, so they're all different models. There's something coming in soon. It has not been launched yet, but it's called the Ultra FICO. Ultra FICO is people will opt into it. It's something that people can opt into, and it determines your finances, not just credit. It also looks at bank accounts. It looks at other information to determine scoreability. That is not going to be adopted by mortgages yet that we know of. It could be coming in the future, but that could really help people, because right now, credit can be pretty unfair. So some people could have really good money in the bank or have had something happen, but credit-wise have had a credit event that's caused their score to go really low, and it's just not always fair. So by the Ultra FICO, eventually it will make a little more sense for people to have their full picture be taken into consideration and not just their credit history. Because the credit history, like I said, there could have been an unforeseen medical bill that is $10,000. It's not like someone wanted to go to the hospital and get a $10,000 medical collection. That's just not how it works. Medical collections are usually unforeseen events that people get these collections on. Okay, so do you have any questions about the scoring models? Yes.
They just, I mean, I'm not sure if it's a scam or not, but they have this thing on TV now, and it's like called Equifax Boost or something, and they say it'll boost your credit score up for signing up with it.
Well, it's probably the analyzer. So there's the different algorithms, and there's different algorithms that people use to try to get a credit score, but it doesn't necessarily mean the bank can use it. So there's different ways to produce different scores. There's so many different codes and algorithms on how to produce a score, but it doesn't necessarily help you for trying to get a mortgage. So that's why we try to look at exactly what the mortgage pull is. So the next pie chart here, the pie chart on the next page, we're going to spend a little time on this because this is what really matters for your consumers as well as for you. So at the top you'll see payment history is 35% of the algorithm. So when we pull a mortgage pull, 35% of what's calculated in that score comes from payment history. And we're going to go into each category a little bit on the slide. You got 15% for length of credit history.
What does it mean?
Length of credit history is, like, let's say you've had a credit card for a year compared to someone who has had a credit card for 9 years. So it has to do with the length of time. New credit is equivalent for 10%. 10% also is types of credit used, and then 30% for amounts owed. Amounts owed is what saves our deals, because people always, a lot of the time, and I'll explain to you why, they'll have a lower score because their credit report is reporting the higher balance when it could be, and they may have made a payment a week later. So it's not a true indication. I have a trick for that. All right, so we're going to break this down a little bit. So payment history, it equates for 35%. It's obviously the largest portion of what contributes to your credit score. Have you paid your creditor on time? 35% of your score. Includes both open accounts and accounts that have already been closed. So if you've had a late on an account that's closed, but it was a late, it's a late, they count it. Scoring model looks at how well accounts have been paid over time. Again, newer credit is not going to have credit depth. So if you've had a lot of lates in the past, but then you've had several months or a year or two with constant good credit or good reporting, it's going to continue to rise your score. It's there, and there's nothing you can necessarily do about it being in your history, but the more activity you put in with good payment history, it's going to counterbalance that late. So one thing to just talk about payment history. Sometimes you can get a creditor to remove a late. It's not always common that they will. You have to usually prove that the late was an error. So for example, we just had somebody, we pulled their payment history, and we showed they made a payment every 30 days. One of the payments was very close to the 30-day mark, but the payment was made and it did clear their account. So we took that information, we brought it to the creditor. The credit bureaus, Equifax, TransUnion, and Experian, they report what the creditor pushes through. So a lot of times people think, oh, I should dispute this with Experian, or I'll dispute it with Equifax. Equifax can't change the information. They can only change if the creditor agrees to the change. So let's say, for example, you have a Chase credit card, and Chase reported you late. You're better off going to Chase and disputing it with them than trying to get it disputed with Equifax, because Equifax is then just going to dispute it with Chase. But if you can prove to Chase that the information was an error, then they can report the information correctly to the bureaus. So a lot of people go directly to the bureaus to this dispute. It doesn't necessarily give you the best result. The creditor is the person who put, or the entity that put the information into the credit bureau. So you always want to start with the creditor first. So if you do ever have late payments, which can really drop a credit score, you want to dispute it with the creditor first. Any questions on payment history? Again, the longer you have accounts, and the more the lates are, the older that they are, the more you have time to recover from. A recent late can really drop your credit score. We've seen one 30-day late drop a 750 to a 680. It's a massive change. The effect of it will be higher if you have young credit. The younger your credit, the higher the effect of a late. I've seen other people that have 800 credit scores, they have a late, it'll affect them just a few points because they have so much activity and so much length in their credit that one late didn't have as much of an impact because their credit is so long and they have so much depth. Okay, again, go to the creditor first. If they can remove the late, it'll get reported properly, and that can make a big difference. The next piece is amounts owed. So here's the big one for us. This is where we save a lot of people a lot of money on interest. Amounts owed make up for 30%, so it's the second largest portion of what the algorithm calculates to produce your credit score, especially your mortgage FICO score. It's a lot easier to clean up than payment history because obviously you pay it down. A trick is sometimes if someone has a high credit balance because maybe they're doing home renovations or something like that, they have a high credit balance, sometimes instead of paying it down, you can actually have the credit limit raised. So you can call a creditor and say, I have $6,000 on here, I have a $7,000 limit, can you give me $10,000 limit? A lot of the times if they have good history, they'll increase the limit. Now the percentage of owed has gone down and you get the same benefit whether you lower the balance or increase the limit. It's the percentage that matters. One of the things that I do personally, I put every single thing on my Capital One. I use it for every single thing. My family goes away once a year for free. We have usually a full paid vacation once a year just by points. So I always use my card, but I pay my card off 3 times a month. Because I never know when the creditor, Capital One, is going to report that balance to my credit bureau. I carry balances constantly, but I pay them off constantly because I just put on my app, I just pay it. I may have a payment due on the 25th, but if I don't keep making payments and they report to the bureaus on the 15th, that might be when I have the highest balance. So you don't necessarily, a lot of people say all the time, oh, I pay my card off on the due date, but you don't know when they reported it to the bureau. So if you pay it multiple times throughout the month and not wait till your due date, your balance will always report lower, which will keep your score healthy. That's something I tell my clients to do all the time when they're in the process of getting pre-approved, is to pay their balances off multiple times throughout the month.
How does American Express work? Because you're saying the percentage when there's no limit on it now.
You mean, and you have to pay the balance at the end of the month? Yeah, that's actually reported differently. When we see Amexes that have, let's say, it's an $8,000 balance at that time, and you pay it off, and it'll show an $8,000 payment. So when we pull credit, we'll see $8,000 balance, $8,000 credit. What we have to do in situations like that, it's not reported as a revolving debt. It's reported as a 30-day pay. So it's a little different than my Capital One, where I have a revolving debt that I can continue to pay and not have to pay the whole thing off in 1 month. Those Amexes get reported differently. So it has to do with when you're going to pay it, but even on those, I always recommend paying them multiple times throughout the month. There's no limit on how many times you can pay your credit card. You could pay it 10 times a month if you wanted to. It's just a lot of people wait to make that one payment per month. That's what I don't recommend doing. But those Amexes are calculated differently because it's the way it's scored and the algorithm scores it. It's not calculated the same as a revolving card that I have the ability to go up and down on. You don't get as much credit for that, believe it or not. I don't know why, but they don't count as much.
So do you pay different amounts during the month?
Mm-hmm.
Or do you pay what you owe, the total of what you owe for that month?
It just depends on what I'm carrying, but typically I'll pay it off multiple times throughout the month. And you can send in as many payments as you want to. And again, that's something I really encourage buyers to do when they're trying to build credit, because their credit scores could be being held down just because they don't realize that the balance is being reported before the payment is due, so they're getting reported with the highest amount. Just pay it off multiple times.
Lynn? One of our clients has a lot of debt, so would it be wise for them to consolidate and use, one of those consolidate the credit cards and then have one payment?
So consolidation may not impact the rate positively. It could. It depends on the person's credit history. But it could give them the ability to pay something off. Revolving debt is hard to pay off. Because you're paying the interest, you're not sure, it's just harder to pay off. An installment loan is like a car loan. And those payoffs, those companies that give you those payoffs will usually report like an installment loan. Let's say the borrower owes $10,000. If trying to pay $10,000 off a credit card can be pretty challenging. But if you go to a consolidation company, they'll give you a $10,000 loan and then a payment to pay that loan off within 5 years. So you're on a track to pay it off versus with a credit card, someone may not have the discipline to be able to do that. So that really helps people get out of debt. It doesn't necessarily help their credit score. But it is a great strategy to get out of debt, so I highly recommend it if they can't seem to get that paid off. Yes?
If your cards were compromised, say at the airport,
Yeah.
and the bank calls you up, you go into, and they know that you were in another country and you weren't in the Bronx.
That happened to me.
Whatchamacallit? Is that, and they give you a new number, but they keep you with American Express or Visa and Visa? Does that affect this, the length of credit? Well, that, if they give you a new card and they transfer?
No, if you notice, your credit card number is not the same as your account number. Your credit card number is usually different. So you can replace a credit card number, get a new credit card with a new number, and so that card is no longer compromised, and it still be the same account with the creditor.
Oh, I didn't notice it. Okay.
Yeah, so it's a different number. Your account number and your credit card number are different.
Rather than using one of those companies to consolidate, are you better off taking out a home equity loan and being able to pay them off that way?
It depends on the person. See, a lot of the time, so home equity lines, I don't love that because I don't love when people use their equity to pay off debt unless they absolutely have to, but a home equity line would be my least favorite option because it's interest only. So what happens if people are having financial issues and they put themselves in credit debt and then they use a home equity line to pay off the debt, chances are they're going to want to take that easy route of paying the minimum payment, and now they're carrying the debt for a much longer period of time. Where we've done 15-year refinances, have taken money out of a home, chopped the mortgage term and lower because the credit card debt was such a high payment on a monthly basis that we were able to refinance the whole mortgage and put the credit card debt in and lower the rate, and they're going to have the whole house paid off in 15 years. And still have lower monthly outlay because the credit card debt becomes so expensive. So it's a lot of different ways to do it, but a home equity line would be my least favorite option to do it. It just depends on the buyer. Okay, so I wanted to, let me just check my notes because I have a couple of notes on here I wanted to make sure.
Yeah, they're all compromised, yeah. Living difference.
Okay. So there's a misconception out there about closing debt. Revolving debt is what's going to have the biggest impact on your credit. Revolving debt is a credit card, like Caesar was mentioning, the Amex. The Amex is revolving because you get to use it and pay it, but an actual revolving debt is really considered something that you can use and pay and have multiple balances throughout the month. So you have a credit limit and you have the ability to use it and the ability to pay it. Your ability to manage that debt gets you the highest impact on your score because you're having to manage it. Compared to a mortgage, you have one payment and you pay it every month. There's really no management other than making the payment. Revolving debt, you have to actually spend the money, pay it, spend the money, pay it. There's more of a self-management involved, and because of that, it gives you more bang for your buck in your credit score. So when you have revolving debt, of course it has to be paid on time, but that's where they look at the balance. That balance to the limit is where you really get the most bang for your buck. A lot of people will say, well, if I'm not using the card, should I pay it off? Or should I close it? Don't close it. If you have a card that's a long history for a long period of time, closing that card is not good because it's hard to replace that time. When you have a card that's open and you have it for a really long time, it gives you more credit depth, So if there's something there's an event on your credit, because you have that credit depth, you're going to recover a lot faster. We have a lot of buyers that have been in a lot of situations with short sales, foreclosures, bankruptcies. There's a lot of situations, we're dealing with people, so the score is an unfair reality of their reality, right? But it's what we have to deal with in our industry. We're dealing with their credit score. When people have had short sales, a bankruptcy, or foreclosure, revolving debt can literally pull them out of the hole and get their score back up and running within 12 months. It can give them a whole new score because the activity is so crucial and it's so impactful in their credit rating that if the people have had mortgage issues or bankruptcy issues, that's really what's going to pull them out of the hole. It's revolving credit. Okay. Length of credit. That's obviously what we spoke about keeping it open for a long period of time. The age of a credit card is very important. Cars, for a certain period of time, you pay them off. You have a car for 5 years, you pay it off. You could have a credit card for 25 years. So the age of your credit card is so important. So the length of credit history is really determined by your cards. You always want to try to have at least one major credit card open at all times because they get more bang for your buck. A store card, yes, gives you credit, but it doesn't give you as much credit as a major credit card like a Visa card, American Express, or something like that. Okay. So I'm going to talk to you about rescoring real quick. So what is a credit rescore? I've had circumstances, I'm going to give you a couple different circumstances. So if you have somebody and you have a buyer and they're struggling to get approved because their credit score is low, our rescoring system is so smart and so intuitive. I can go in, pull someone's credit, and I'm going to give you a live scenario. I had a wife with a 720 and a husband with a 580. The reason we needed both incomes though, so I couldn't take him off the loan or I couldn't get them a house, or I couldn't get them a loan. So what I did was I went in my rescoring tool, I opened up the husband's credit, and I went to his middle score, which was a 580, in this case it was Equifax. I went in and I made believe I added him to one of his wife's credit cards, the longest one. So I went in, I made believe the authorized user was open, the credit limits, the credit line was for 10 years. He got him from a 580 to a 680 in 30 days. So it went from not being able to get a loan to being able to get a loan and using both incomes within 30 days. That's not something I can force onto the credit report. That has to happen organically. So they called the credit company, she got him a card, it started reporting, I signed them up for Credit Karma because we needed to monitor it so we knew when it popped up. As soon as it popped up, I re-pulled credit and I was able to get them an approval. So that's the type of stuff we can do with these types of systems. It's really, really good stuff. I mean, this saves transactions one after the other. It saves transactions, but it's just using the tools. It's like being, you got to use the tool. It's a tool. Authorized user accounts don't necessarily give you credit all the time. Sometimes authorized user accounts can lower the credit. Again, it depends on the buyer's profile. So we'll go into that same simulation tool and I'll see someone with a 580 score. I'll go in and remove the wife's authorized user card because she has a very high limit and they don't have the money to pay it off, let's say, or she doesn't have the credit to raise the limit. I'll go in and remove it and I'll have the same result. The score will jump up. So it's not always, add an authorized user. Sometimes it could be removing an authorized user that gives you the same benefit. So each individual credit is determined differently. So that's why we have to use that tool. So if someone says, we don't want our credit pulled, it's worth every bit of a credit inquiry when we can use this type of a tool because we can get them from no loan to a loan very quickly. If someone needs to pay something off, instead of waiting for it organically, let's say, for example, they have a high limit, we want to pay it down, we want to get the credit pull, we can rescore it in 3 to 5 days. So if they just pay it down, they send us the printout showing it's been paid, we can get the score rescored within 3 to 5 days. Again, that's a quick thing. We don't even have to wait sometimes. We do that just so they can get a better interest rate. You could be in contract and we could do that to get a better interest rate. Okay. Authorized users we touched base on. New credit. Sometimes new credit can hurt your score and sometimes it can help your score. If someone doesn't have enough credit, we can go in and make believe they opened up a credit card. I can make believe there's a certain balance and it'll tell me what will happen to the score. Again, I can't force that onto a credit report, but they can let me know through personal monitoring when it hits and then I can re-pull credit. But my simulation tool will say, if you add a credit card to this person, it's going to jump their score from, maybe even no score. They may not have a score at all because they have no activity, to adding a credit credit card onto it and put them into the category for financing. And vice versa, let's say someone goes and buys a car, well, because the credit is brand new, the system doesn't know how to calculate the activity, and their credit may not need the activity, so their score could drop. It usually takes a few months because now the credit system has to be able to calculate their ability to make this payment. Okay. So we're going to go to, we've kind of talked about this, so let's jump to page 8 at the bottom. So this is what a credit score looks like, a credit report looks like. And at the top it says what the score is, and you'll see there's categories listed underneath the score. It usually comes up with 5 categories of what determines that particular score. So this particular borrower at the top shows Experian 622, Equifax 614, and TransUnion 627. And then below it are the 5 categories of why that credit is being calculated at that rate. So for example, Experian is noticing derogatory public records or collections, and that's a part of why that score is low. So we know, okay, well, if it's showing public records or collections, that's the first thing I want to tackle to try to get that score from a 622 up. It's telling me what's calculating it. So the scores are, you're able to then really zone in and start fixing things rather than guessing. You know what's calculating the score. It's listed right on the credit report. Sometimes these are not 100% accurate in a sense, where they may say derogatory payments, but the borrower may not have had a derogatory payment for 6 years. So there's nothing we could do about that. But if there's collections, we can try to tackle those. Below that is what the credit report looks like. Now, you've heard the term, or maybe not have heard the term, trade line. What a trade line is each individual creditor. So for example, SunTrust is a trade line. Discover is a trade line. Amex is a trade line. And speaking to Caesar's point, you see where it says $1,800 balance and $1,800 payment. That's what we're talking about. It matches because it has to be paid off in full. That account does not allow you to make a minimum payment. You have to pay it in full. And also, if you notice next to it, it says open instead of revolving. Because it's an open credit, it has to be paid in full. You're not going to get the same benefit for that account than you would, for example, the Discover card, because the Discover card has a $3,500 limit and a $2,100 balance. They have the ability to pay and not pay. So that's where you're going to get more credit. So that's called a trade line. You'll notice in the top here it says DLA. That stands for date of last activity. The DLA date is probably the most important date on a credit report. Without the activity on a credit card, it goes dead and it becomes dormant and you don't get activity. So it's not only important to have a credit card open, but using the credit card is what stimulates the activity for them to report the activity and the ability for you to use it, and you get more credit. So it's not just having it open, it's using it. Medical collections, we mentioned before. Medical collections are very easy to fix. They passed a law a long time ago that basically says if you have a medical collection and you pay it, the creditor should remove it. So we, a lot of the time, can go into the simulation tool with someone that has a lower credit score, if it's medical related, and if it's in collection, the person can go and negotiate the collection down, and it'll report as either paid, or I always recommend ask them to delete it. They will delete it most of the time, and if they delete it, it's as if it never existed. If you pay it, it'll show a zero balance, won't necessarily give you the jump that you're looking for, but it'll stop it from reporting and trying to hold your credit down. It'll free up your credit if you pay it, but if you remove it, it's as if it never existed. So medical collections are very easy to fix, and they save loan after loan after loan after loan. You'll see at the top it says NA. The reason why it says NA is Equifax follows the HIPAA laws, and you'll notice on the right-hand side where it says NA, it says EF. That's the code for Equifax. And you'll notice underneath it'll say NCO, but then it has Equifax, Experian, and TransUnion. There's all 3 reporting it. If ever Equifax is the creditor, they'll never tell you who the medical person is because they follow the HIPAA law. The other 2, for whatever reason, don't. So I don't know why they're allowed to do that, but they'll tell you who the creditor is for you to make the calls and so forth. If there's an NA, you have to call Equifax and they have to give you the information over the phone or through writing. They won't just put it on a credit report. Inquiries are, a lot of people are concerned about inquiries. The common question in our industry is, and this relates to all of us, what if I go shop for a mortgage and then I go to someone else and shop for a mortgage, it's going to affect my credit score. When you get a mortgage pull, the bureau doesn't even count it at first. It gives you 30 days before they take it into consideration. After the 30 days, if you've had 10 mortgage pulls, it's counted as one. They want that to be the case because they want people to be able to shop and not have a concern about their credit score dropping for 10 inquiries. So for the first inquiry, it doesn't get calculated at all. And then after 30 days, if there's 10, it counts as one. If it's on the 45th day, they go and apply somewhere again, it's two. So that's how it works. But then that's a new 30-day period. So it's a 30-day period depending upon how many times you pull your credit for a mortgage pull. So if someone's concerned about having their credit pulled again and they want a second opinion, it's okay as long as they do it within 30 days, it'll only count one time. Inquiries count for 12 months. They'll stay on your history for 24 months. You'll see who's pulled your credit for 24 months, but it only counts for 12. So if someone shops for a while, they don't find anything, and they decide to wait a year, in a year from now, it again counts one time. And it's only counting that one time because they only look back for 12 months as far as the algorithm. Yes?
And how many points does a poll hurt your score?
It varies, Caesar, because if someone has, an 800 score and they've had credit for 30 years, an inquiry can have no impact at all. Where if someone they're 20 years old and they're, just starting their credit and they have their mortgage pulled for a mortgage inquiry, it could have, a bigger impact because they don't have the credit depth to withstand that inquiry. Okay,
Excuse me.
yes.
Where did I hear that medical bills cannot count against your credit score? I just heard that recently.
They can be removed from, they do count against your credit score, but they can be removed as if they never existed if paid. Yeah. Yeah, and that is information that's very important because a lot of people don't know that. So they'll think that they can't do anything because they have medical bills. They could be paying monthly payments to try to pay them off. Once they're paid, they are supposed to be removed. That's the law that was passed many, many years ago, actually. We talked about the inquiries. So here's something that's interesting at the bottom, page 10, statute of limitations. I'm going to read through this real quick because this is something that comes up a lot. People say, when is it going to fall off my credit? You've heard that maybe I have 1,000 times in my life. Okay, so trade lines. A trade line, again, is the creditor. Remember, Chase, Discover, those are all trade lines. A trade line, credit accounts without delinquencies, typically removed after 10 years. Credit accounts with delinquencies, you'll see that the delinquencies will be removed after 7 years. Collection accounts, usually 7 years from the charge-off date or the date of first delinquency. So again, the date, sometimes things get re-reported, and something that people fight is, let's say there's a medical collection from 10 years ago, but that collection was sold off to another creditor. If it was originally 10 years ago, they should not still be reporting it. So that's something people fight to get collections removed, not paid, just removed, because the statute of limitations say you can only go for 7 years. So people go and fight that because it could be something very old, but it just keeps getting sold to a new creditor, and then it keeps reporting new. But the event happened a long time ago. That can be fought and it can be removed. Charge-offs are 7 years. Public records, typically you'll see them go away for Chapter 7 and 11 after 10 years. Chapter 13, discharged, 7 years. 13, dismissed, 10 years. The difference between the two is one is discharged and one is dismissed. So it has to do with their pay history, it has to do with their ability to complete the discharge of the bankruptcy. Tax liens can no longer be reported. So tax liens are no longer in effect. Those of you that have been in the business a long time like me, you know tax liens were a big part of credit reports. It was a problem. We couldn't get people financed all the time because they owe the IRS $5,000. We do pull something called a 4506. A 4506 is going to tell us if they owe money to the IRS and if they have a payment to the IRS. So then we can make sure it's accounted into their debt ratio. But it's no longer reporting on the credit report, which is really good because that was quite an unfair filing. And judgments are 7 years from the file date. So it's different than what we talked about collections because a file date, if it's 7 years from the file date. They could have had the incident 20 years ago, because they have so many years to be able to file a judgment against somebody, but it's 7 years from the file date. Something that comes up a lot is on divorces. We'll get somebody that has had a foreclosure, and someone will say, oh, that was my ex-spouse's house. We lost that in the divorce. I gave that to them in the divorce. If they were on the note, there's nothing we could do about it. It's just as much their foreclosure it is the ex-spouse. However, you'll see it sometimes it'll pop up where it'll say on a line item, we'll see bankruptcy, but it wasn't our borrower that filed bankruptcy, it was their ex-spouse. So we just have to show it's the ex-spouse's bankruptcy. That's something a little different. But if it's a mortgage and you were on the mortgage and you signed the note, it's just as much your responsibility as it is your ex-spouse's, even if you lost the house in the divorce.
Lynn, is that the same thing for a rent?
It could be if it shows up as a collection and you're responsible to pay it, but you left that lease to your,
Well, there's two people.
right. Yeah, if there's two people on the lease, you're just as much responsible. So if it goes into collection, you get charged for it just as much as they do. So if you sign, you owe, whether you're divorced and you lost the asset, if you owe the money, part of the divorce should be that you get out of that loan because you have no control on that after that. Just because they're making the payment doesn't mean you no longer owe the money. Okay, so disputing inaccurately, there's something on credit reports we pull that says if an account has been in dispute, that is an indication of a false credit score. So let's say, for example, someone had a dispute on a collection and they say it's not theirs. Well, if I file a dispute, remember we talked about filing it with the bureau versus fixing it with the creditor. If I file it with the bureau, it's going to give me an inaccurate read on my credit score because it's saying as if that's an incorrect filing. So the system is going to pull it as if that shouldn't be there. So if I go in my system and remove the dispute, I can go from a 680 to a 580. So those disputes are really important for us as loan officers to look at because we want to make sure that the score we have is accurate. If I go in through DU will tell me you need to remove the dispute because I don't have an accurate credit score. So disputes are very important. You can get a free credit report once a year at annualcreditreport.com. I always recommend that to people because it's a great way to check credit. And you can call the number or go to the website, and I recommend that for all our clients. I always recommend people for that service. Protecting your identity, the best thing you can do, if you're monitoring credit, you're not necessarily protecting your identity, you're monitoring your credit. If something is reported, if Credit Karma lets you know, it's because it's already happened, so it could be too late. If you freeze your credit, then things can't be reported without it being unfrozen. So I put some lists on here for credit resources for people who want to freeze their accounts. You can freeze right on those websites. And you can even go in and say right on the website, I only want Supreme Lending to be able to pull my credit, and it'll unfreeze it for 24 hours. It's a little bit of a pain in the neck, but it's worth it because no one can access your credit unless it's unfrozen. And there's a little more resources on the back
And
page.
when you freeze it, is there some sort of a password that you can open it?
Yes. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Just want to make sure I didn't leave out any important parts. I think I covered it. And that I did. Okay. Well, that's it. I hope you found that helpful. Thank you.